Hello and welcome to the Creative Community Podcast. This is the show where we interview local creatives and creative organisations. I am your host, Claire Beardraz. I'm a spoken word performer, freelance creative and creative arts psychotherapist. And for today's episode, I am joined by the lovely Dan. Hello, Dan. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm really good. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So, Dan, as we start this episode, I usually ask whoever I have on the same question. And it's a bit of a loaded existentialist question, I guess, in some ways. But if you could provide a little bit of context for those who might not know who you are in any way. Who are you? What do you do? How would you describe, I guess, like yourself? If someone was to say, like, who is Dan?
I think I'm quite a quirky, creative type of person. So like I'm Dan, I run Give Poetry a Chance, and originally I started out as a poet. I started writing probably around 2017, and then slowly but surely I became an organiser. I'd probably describe myself more as an organiser now than a poet. But yeah, I'm just kind of a very happy-go-lucky kind of person.
I feel like it's the sort of energy you need in life at the moment. Like, I feel like that's cool. So were you saying that you started writing in 2017?
Thereabouts, yeah. So what happened was I was in a job that I didn't particularly enjoy. So it really got me down. And to get there, it was a 2-train commute. So
oh my goodness.
Yeah, I know, it was annoying. And then the second train was always delayed. So I'd usually like either miss one or miss getting to work. And anyway, so basically when I was commuting, I started to write down my thoughts. So I personally struggled to talk about how I felt. So I think for like a lot of young men, they struggle to speak. So I was probably, I think, how old was I in 2017? Like 21, 22. So at that point in time, I was just felt quite lost. So like I'm actually a type 1 diabetic, found out I was in 18. And I feel like I've kind of struggled through that from 18 till probably, I don't know, about 23, 24. And during that time, there's a lot going through my head. So I was in a job I didn't particularly enjoy because of my disease. I hadn't met anyone in like my love life. So I felt quite like isolated and lonely at like 22. And just all these feelings came crashing down. So while I was on the train, I just used to open my phone notes and put it all down. And it kind of felt like it was clearing a lot of thoughts from my head into like the phone, which it just felt like a lot of weight was lifted. So yeah, that was my kind of writing journey. And when I realised the job wasn't for me, I was sat in like in a Wavertree pub. So me and my mates used to go to like Wavertree High Street and we'd do like a pub crawl, all the pubs down Wavertree High Street. Nice. Oh, it's very messy.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So when we were in there, my mates sat me down, they're like 9 years older than me, and they turned around and went, look, you can either apply for new jobs, this is like March 2017, or you can go travelling. So one of my mates at the time, his then partner lived in Vietnam, and he used to commute. Yeah, it was crazy. I say commute, sorry. He used to, it's a bit of a weird word. He used to go and travel to see her every so often. Yeah. So he said, look, if you can't get a job, give yourself a deadline, then quit your job and go travelling. So that's exactly what I did. And while I was there, I'd done like a TEFL, and it just gave me time to like collate my poems and just reflect, really. Like, it sounds so cliche that I found myself when travelling, but like it was quite true, to be honest. It was time alone like that I needed. So although it kind of felt isolated, I live at home with 4 other people. Yeah. So it was time away where I could really reflect and just kind of think about how I felt. Like, and then I felt like I could then be open with a lot of people through like writing. So I made a few copies of the book, a few copies of a book, and printed them in Vietnam, and then brought them back. And that was kind of how my writing, not career, I don't make money, my kind of writing journey started. But yeah, so
amazing.
Don't know if you want to.
Yeah, no, like that's great. I find that like one thing, obviously I know we've like had the opportunity to like speak before and things like that. One thing is so similar about our journeys that I also started writing to help me get through like difficult times. But I know you were touching on the point that there's a lot of stigma around male mental health as well. So, you know, the fact that you were able to turn to an art form like being able to write and to see how it was able to transform you and who you are, and I guess also inform some of the things that you do now in your life.
Yeah, I definitely think so. So I think at the moment in time, while we've got like less and less youth centres and like libraries are getting shut, and resources for children and teens are starting to go, I think writing's a very good way to help them through struggles of being like a young adult or early teens. I feel like it's a good free way to kind of process your thoughts and emotions. I feel like as well a lot of young lads in the city especially can use it instead of turning to like gangs and knife crime. They can process those thoughts and feelings in a healthy way, and I feel like a lot of like lads will probably maybe snarl at the idea of poetry, but if you can get them into events like mine, for example, then they'll realize it's not just for like middle to upper class elites, and it's not for like, not saying that they are poorly educated, but it's not just for like the well educated. It's for everybody in the community, no matter what background you're from, no matter what age, gender, no matter where language you speak. It can easily help anyone, no matter where they're from. So I feel like it's something we should crack into as a community. And I feel like it's really helped me, and it's definitely helped like the likes of my brother as well. He came to one of my events and wrote a poem for the very first time after going to one of my events.
Wow.
I know, it's so nice, so heartfelt. It like really touched me. It was lovely. So
that's great. And I completely agree with you as well, and in how it can really transform. And I think as a community, we definitely need to encourage that more in sort of the next generations, because it can be so tricky to speak to people, but sometimes just writing it down can be enough. Sometimes it's not. But I know for a fact as well, a lot of people sometimes think that in order to write poetry or to call yourself a poet, you have to perform it. And some writing's just for yourself. I know there's loads of pieces that I first wrote when I was getting into it that were just for me, and it was just for the process to get my thoughts and feelings onto like a different medium. And that was it, and I won't ever go back to it. But there are some that you're like, actually, this might be useful to share with other people. And like you say, you have those moments where people will witness that poetry and feel inspired themselves to then pick up the pen and paper or pick up their phone and write something as well. And I think that's what's great about Give Poetry a Chance, is that it platforms and vocalizes that as well. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how that started off, because it seems like it really matches with like your view on poetry as well. Yeah, sure. So it kind of continues from a story of like how I got into writing. So I came back with a book that I've put together from Vietnam, and then I dished a few copies out. So there's a local promoter called Dave McTague from Mellowtone. Fantastic guy. I absolutely love him. He's been doing gigs now for over 15 years in Liverpool. He's really helped the community. He heard that I was writing poetry when I came back from Vietnam, so we asked for a copy, so we gave him it. And then I bumped into him in, I think it was Sound City in 2018, and he was there, and he was like, "Oh, you've got to perform, like you should start performing." And at that point in time I had braces, so I was like, "No way, I'm not performing, like I don't want to, because like my speech will be affected because of my braces," which looking back was just stupid. But so he said, "Fair enough, whatever, you know, it's up to you." And then late 2018, I think it was around November, December, I got a phone call, like very cryptic, and he was like, "I've got this idea, I'll call you next week." So I was like, I was like, this is really weird. So I was kind of on the edge of my seat. It's like, I wonder what Dave's going to come back with. So he rang me next week and said, "Are you busy tonight?" So I said, "No." So he said, "Right, get your things after work, and we're going to go round different venues in Liverpool City Centre, and you can pick whatever venue you want to host your own event in. You're clearly made to organise." Because basically I'd done a bit of work experience for him throughout the years, and I'd supported all his events, and like I love what he does, and I'm inspired heavily by him. So he was probably the reason why I started the events. So that was how the events came about. So we went to a few venues, and the Jacaranda vinyl shop upstairs fit, and I thought, this is the place. So coming up with the name was a completely different scenario. So that was, John Lennon and Yoko Ono kind of can take the credit for that, but I was sat in my room way before this when I wanted to start publishing my poetry on Instagram, and I was still quite shy because it's to do with my feelings. I thought I don't want anyone to see it, so I created the alias,
of Give Poetry a Chance. So
Right.
I've got like a poster on my wall from Glastonbury in either 2014 or 15 when Yoko Ono performed, and it said like Give Peace a Chance. So I was like, I need something to fit the characters on Instagram, Give Poetry a Chance. So when the event started, I nicked the name of the account because it was already set up, and then took all the followers that I already had from that and then just converted it into an events page. So that is how the event started. So the first one I think was on the 28th of Feb 2019, and there's been 25 of them since.
Right.
And then offshoot events as well, where I've helped other people out and then brought like guest poets in under the name Give Poetry a Chance. So yeah, it's been fantastic. We survived the pandemic. I know.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. It's just the love and support of this city and from people from outside the city is just unbelievable. Like I've had people perform from LA, from loads of different cities around the United Kingdom, from different countries in Europe, or even South America. So it's just unbelievable, like how the power of the words can bring people together. So yeah, it's been a lovely journey.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously I've had the privilege to attend and perform at Give Poetry a Chance, and it is just a lovely atmosphere. I know you've moved location as well, but like, you know, it just it feels like a really like safe and open space. And I think even the title of the events being Give Poetry a Chance, it sort of, that in itself doesn't feel inclusive, like or rather exclusive. It's sort of like, oh, I can go to this. It's like if it feels very open in how it's like presented to people, definitely. And you have people who are just there to listen, people who've never been before, people who've never written, you know. It's really lovely to attend. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear the story behind sort of organising it, getting the title for the events and stuff like that. I'm wondering then how you've seen sort of these events grow and develop, and I guess the name Give Poetry a Chance, because I feel like most people know you mention it and it's like, yeah, I know Give Poetry. Oh, I know Dan. Like, what's that been like for you, that seeing that growth and development?
It's lovely. Like I look back and think I'm so lucky to have met so many wonderful, amazing people. Like I've met hundreds of people through the events, and it's all came from my initial struggle with like anxiety and my mental health. So I think it means a lot because people originally came when it first started out. They had no idea who I was, and there were some like days when we didn't have many attendees when it first started out, but there's been like a loyal following since the beginning, and it's just grew and grew and grew. But I love it. I love helping people. I love listening to people's stories. Like, I think my mission in life is to find out more about other people. I feel like we learn from others, their stories, their lives. And like, I've only lived my life, so I want to find out about other people's because my experiences won't be the same as others. So I feel like as a community, the best way to progress is to learn and support each other. And I feel like that's what I want to try and do. So, yeah, it's just been lovely. Like, it was people who've performed at my events have just went on to bigger and better things. And I view mine as like the starting point. Like, there are other events out there who like I've got connections, but I quite like the fact that it's in the name, I give people a chance as well.
Yeah.
Like, it's no matter who people are, if they're just starting out or they've been around for a while, they all get a maximum of 10 minutes and there's no headliners. The set list is literally completely random. Like, I have no method to madness. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it's a bit better if it kind of like thought properly about it, but it's all a part of the fun. But no, I'm very, very lucky to met so many wonderful people in the city. And I think, if this sounds awful, but if I was hit by a bus tomorrow, I know that I've done my bit and that I've tried to help people. And it's just, I can say that like I've tried, and it's just been really nice seeing so many people have a platform and speak about what means so much to them.
And I can really echo that and see like sort of those opportunities you've provided for myself and for others as well, definitely. I think as well what I really like is how supportive you are, and like the brand of Give Poetry a Chance is, in the sense of it's not like we are the only poetry night that is running and the only like open mic style sort of, you know, you're very open to sort of helping other other events that are happening, which I think is great, because sometimes you can find in the scene that people do want to be like, I have to be the only one.
Yeah.
And like, it's about being the best and the top, and like,
I don't see the point in that. Like, I've saw that like throughout like trying to work in the music industry. Like, I find the music kind of industry in every kind of place around the UK seems very competitive, whereas poetry scene can be a little bit, but more than not likely. Like, tomorrow I'm actually going to meet Ali Harwood from Line of Arts, going to meet her for a cuppa and like a nice little gab. And Matt Jacobson from Lethal Faith, who we both know. I love Matt as well. And then you've Nick Ellis has got the Sunset Sessions on Saturday or tomorrow, which I'm going to attend as well. So I try and support as many events as possible. You've got like the likes of Violette, run by PJ Smith. Yeah, PJ Smith.
Yeah.
I always get his surname wrong for some reason. And then you've got Lovely Word as well. There's so many events that I've tried to attend or attended throughout like the past 3.5, 4 years. I think the only thing is like my life's starting to get busier, so I can't attend as many events as I want to. But yeah, it's really good to like know other people who organize events, and I can send people their way. So if people can't get a slot on Give Poetry a Chance, I can always signpost them to other events to make sure that they get the platform they need. I do feel bad due to like after COVID, there's so much of a waiting list now.
right.
It's hard to get people on. So like I had an email before of someone saying, I know there's a waiting list, but can you put me on? And just because like it's so many people now, I think as they get more and more popular, I'm having to say to people like it could be like months and months, which feels, it doesn't like, it feels a bit, I know like it can't be helped, but just kind of feel like I'm letting people down a little bit just because they really want to perform. And a few of these people, like it's their first time. So I think I can't really prioritize them because it's not a fair system, but I try and help people to find other avenues to go down.
Yeah, that's great. It's lovely how there's a sense of community there within the poetry scene. And it's almost like, if it's not a case of like everyone knows everyone, it's also like, oh, there are connections there between like, oh, you know this person, oh yeah, I've heard of this person, or I've seen this person perform. And it really maintained that openness of and sense of community within sort of the arts in that sector. I know you touched on you'd worked in the music industry, so what sort of thing were you sort of involved in?
I sort of did. So initially in 2012, I started getting work experience with Mellowtone, run by Dave McTague. And basically used to help out in Leaf. They do gigs there. Oh, it was so nice. Upstairs in Leaf, fantastic for gigs. So my very first one was Jessica Hoop, who's an American performer. And she's very folky, and it was just amazing. So I basically just helped set up the stage, and then kind of shadowed the sound engineer. So really wanted to become either a sound engineer or work in a studio. That was 2012, and then I got work experience with Steve Levine, who's been a producer of Culture Club and The Clash, Stevie Wonder and the Beach Boys. So big name. But around the time I worked with Steve, which was October 2013, was around the time I became quite ill with type 1.
Right.
And that's when I started to struggle. So I'd just been in a session with Steve, and I was like really thirsty, and it was drinking loads of like sugary drinks because I was thirsty, which I didn't realize at the time was making me really ill. So then I ended up going to hospital not long after that. And then my confidence just dropped completely. I was working in Park Street studio sessions, and I had to leave early because I had to go and get injections. And at the time I struggled to do them myself. Felt really embarrassed to talk about it, so I'd go home and my mum would do them. So it completely, like, from being 18, I felt like I'm an adult to like go and regressing really. So the kind of music dream still kind of like dragged on a little bit and then fizzled out. So I worked for Merseyside Arts Foundation, which was the Park Street sessions. I helped do a gig in Eric's with them, and just kind of floated about a little bit, and then I ended up working for Adlib Audio, and then just worked there. And I think that was kind of the end of my dream of working in the music industry. I think at the time I just thought this isn't for me, which is a shame because I love music. Like I listen to it every single day. My my poems are based on music. So my creative style is I'll put a song on loop, and the instruments and inspire me to kind of just what's it called? Like, not zone out, but it is zoning out. But I daydream, but there's
Right.
another term for it. But I basically daydream and start to like think of what the instruments and songs mean to me. That's how I like write. So music still holds a huge place in my life. I'm constantly at gigs. So yeah, I don't think I'll be getting a job in the music industry unless like I'm doing poetry over music anytime
Yeah.
soon. But yeah, I think those days are unfortunately well and truly over.
I mean, that's a really like fascinating way of like being able to create your poetry as well, like having that thought process and creative process as well behind it. Would you say then, I mean, just hearing off your music experience, would you always say that you've sort of been creative throughout your whole life, or was it something then eventually when you started to think about music you were like, okay, or do you remember like being in childhood and being like always engaged with
I think I
art?
wanted to, but I just didn't have the confidence. I think I've lacked confidence for a very, very long time. And even still now, like, I don't think people realise when I'm on stage, like, I can be a bag of nerves. And even now, like, doing this interview, like,
Yeah.
initially when it started, I was, like, constantly thinking of what I'm going to say next. But no, my earliest memories is I had a CD Walkman, and I used to live in Tuebrook, and basically my mum and dad gave me a CD Walkman and a few CDs. And I know it's cliche because I live in Liverpool, but I was mad on the Beatles, which is weird because mum and dad just weren't interested.
Yeah.
They weren't bothered about the Beatles. So from like, I can remember the age of 3 sitting with a CD Walkman and headphones and just like zoning out. I actually thought the Beatles were the cartoon characters from the Yellow Submarine for years. So like I
love
used
that.
to, I knew what they looked like in
Yeah.
real life, but when I think of the Beatles, I think of like the cartoon characters. But I think I used to like, oh, what's the term called? It's not, there's another word for daydream, but like a proper term. When you kind of, it's escapism, it doesn't even begin with D. So I use escapism quite a lot, which can be dangerous at times because like I end up like walking into things if I'm just daydreaming too much. But I think because of that, I can start to think of like different, like not different worlds, but like when I'm writing to instruments, I can think of different scenarios. So like one that's quite like clear to me is every time I listen to Lullaby by The Cure, I think of like a garden in a GP surgery when I was little. I don't know why, it's just really specific.
Yeah.
And same with like Come As You Are by Nirvana. I always picture like a petrol station in America in the 90s with skateboarders. Like it's weird, but certain songs just kind of bring images to my head. So like I usually like either close my eyes or daydream or whatever, and then that's where like my writing comes from. So whether or not it's any good, I don't know, but it's just how I kind of just go through it. And I think it could like connect, like thinking about it, like to any worries that I have. I'd maybe escape from them by like daydreaming.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's kind of why I've wrote in the past, or like it's just kind of getting away from like the real world for a bit. So yeah, it's a very odd way of like creating writing, but it seems to have helped me so far. So like during the pandemic, I wrote like a poem about all the positive things that happened in the pandemic, and that was to David Gilmour from Pink Floyd's podcast. And he had, I think it was either his granddaughter play like a string instrument, literally looped it for like 10 seconds, and that 10-second clip inspired the poem. And it's really weird. Like, so
Yeah.
I don't know anyone who does that. I don't know if there's anyone out there who writes that way, but I'd be really interested to know if there is. But
Too.
yeah, it's music plays a huge part of my life. Like I just wouldn't know what to do without it. Even like local musicians such as like Nick Ellis, Bill Ryder Jones, Mick Head from Shack, Ian McCulloch from Echo and the Bunnymen, all their lyrics and music just inspire me. Like Bill Ryder Jones, I just think is fantastic. I think sounds weird, but there's something about sadness which makes it kind of mysterious, but like not desirable, but I don't know.
It intrigues, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious then, when it comes to sort of sharing your poetry or like performing your poetry, do you ever have those images in your mind, or can you hear sort of the songs that you were listening to or the loops that you were playing when you were originally writing it, or is it different for you when you perform?
A little bit. So what I've started doing is like the second book I made, I started putting the songs that inspire me at the bottom. So when I'm on stage and I'm reading, I can then see the songs. So like I've got one, I've actually forgot the name of the poem, but it's inspired by Ocean Rain by Joachim Bunnyman. And it's basically, what's it called? That's going to annoy me now, but it's basically about two boats which cross paths, and basically it's about one boat who it's a metaphor. It's basically a person who believes that the opportunity in their life is gone, and they're sad that the opportunity is missed. But then the kind of moral of the poem is that you may think something's past, but something else will come your way.
Right.
So it's about like a lover. So it's two boats which dock into the same harbour and then sail together into the wild blue yonder. So it's kind of like, it's inspired by Ocean Rain, because it just feel like Ocean Rain's like a really kind of like romantic song in a way. What it means, it's quite romantic to me anyway, just kind of like Ian McCulloch's vocals. So yeah, different songs mean different things. Like Mick Head, who's in Shaq and Pale Fountains, he a lot of his songs from Shaq have inspired many different poems, and I think of those songs when I read the poems. But same with Jeff Buckley. There's one where it's basically about a lover who's waiting for their partner to come back, and they're in a house and they're looking out the window on a rainy day, and they're just basically dreaming of that person opening the door and embracing them in their arms. But Jeff Buckley's voice on I think it's Love Is You Should Come Over, because like even the title as well, I didn't pay attention to his lyrics, but like the title of Love Is You Should Come Over is, for me, it's like someone's like lost and they're coming back. So yeah, I do hear like certain songs in it. But yeah, I just think music can be harnessed as like a creative tool, and I think a lot of writers would benefit from listening to music as well to write.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like even the way you're explaining these pieces that you've written, there's so much imagery that comes with that, and sort of then my own imagination is sort of like taking me somewhere else, and I'm having my own picture of what you're describing, of someone being at home on a rainy day, like, you know what I mean? So it's like, you know, we're having that shared thought and idea, and our images in our mind could be completely different and yet the same.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's something really like profound, I guess, about that, not to be one of those stereotypical like, oh my god, wow, that's so deep. But it's so cool that we can have that sort of shared experience, and yet it can be so unique to ourselves as well, and have completely different meanings to us and takeaways as well.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I think that's the nice thing about like just words in general, like they're so powerful. And I think that's why people get into poetry, because there might be poets that they can relate to, although they may like live completely different lives. There might be something that's said where they think, oh, that's me. Or they may take a completely different take on a poem. It might be like said a certain way, but it might mean something completely different to them. And they like what was it? I think I done one about, was it knife crime? And there was a certain phrase in it that someone came up to me and said, oh, I love that line. It means this, this, and this to me. And I was like, I didn't see that, but thanks very much. That's so cool that you can take something away from something I wrote, which is just not how I intended it to be. And it's lovely that like the options are endless. It's a bit, again, without being that person, it's a bit like when you analyse Shakespeare in school. As much as I hated like the amount of what do you think Shakespeare meant by this, with our work, people can look into it. And I think that's the nice thing about poetry, is it can mean endless things to different people. And I think that's why like I struggle to write at the moment, is a lot of my poems have visual imagery behind them. So I have to be in like a certain mind frame. So like I probably write like 2 poems in like a year. It's struggling quite a lot at the moment. Like I'm doing Nick Ellis's August event on Nomad on Smithtown. And I'm just struggling at the moment to think of ideas, just because I think it's when you've got so much going on and you hear them everywhere, it's hard to kind of like sit down and write. But yeah, it's lovely that people can find different meanings in words that you just can never expect.
I want to ask this question because I experienced this, and I'm just curious if you do too. do you ever get to a point where, you know, you're going to quite a few events and you're performing, you're sharing your poetry, that you don't have the time to write new poetry? Do you ever feel like sometimes you forget to write new stuff? Like, in a sense, because obviously I know you have 2 books. So is it sometimes difficult to also be like, I should write for a new event, I should write for this new content for this event because I have these other books? So it's like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so at the moment I've basically just been going through like I've got like ideas documents on Word, like hundreds of ideas. It's awful. Like I'm always like, I'll go through them and I never do. And there's some lines when I think I actually really like that, but I can't think of anything for it to go with. So what I've been doing for the past like umpteen events is just finding ideas and reading through ideas. So I done 2 kind of half poems on Wednesday, and I couldn't think of anything to read, and I hate most of my poems now because I've read them that much. It's like the first book I completely just dismiss. I think it's just like very early days. It's like most people have like, oh, I love you too. Oh, this person, like, they're so good. And it's just like typical like love poems. Whereas I think the second book can relate to a lot more of the poems, but I'm still thinking I've outgrown these. I've become a different person since I've wrote them. Yeah. And there's a few that I still love to come back to, but I've performed them that many times that I'm like, people are sick of this now. I mean, people probably don't think that, but like, we're our own worst critic. But
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's bad. I think like so many people struggle with like imposter syndrome. Like I've had people come up and go, oh, I really like that one. I'm like, it was crap. Just like, I hate it.
Yeah. The amount of times where people say the same thing, like, I love that. That was such a good performance. Like, that was the worst performance of my life. Like, it's crazy. I guess it goes back to the same thing around like, you know, the way we can have different interpretations of poetry. There's also those different interpretations of like when people witness poetry. I think I've had a few times where people have asked, I don't have a poetry book or anything out, but I've had people sort of email me and ask to have a copy to read, because when they read it versus when they hear me perform it, it feels like 2 completely different pieces to them. Do you ever find that yourself when you're like looking at your piece from your book versus when you're reading it out loud? Yeah,
there's only a few that I read the same way, and they're usually like angry and stuff. Anything politically charged, I'm like, no, I can hear that. Whereas I think everything else, I just kind of read it like the voice in your head's just very, like, just not very emotional at all. But it's funny you should say that, because there's a poet, Gary Jardine, who I love. He was around the earlier events, and basically me, him, and Louise Evans used to kind of hang around together. All of us are poets. And we've heard his poems and like knew his lines. So we'd get drunk and like one of his songs, I keep saying that, one of his poems starts with, she's like the tide on every beach. And every time we'd have a drink, we'd be like, she's like the tide on every beach. But he'd say it like with such an impact that it was just great. But he'd be like, yeah, whatever. But yeah, it's every time like I read his poetry, I hear it in his voice, and it's quite interesting to like have those emotions like down on paper. I think it's like a skill. Like if certain poets can like leave that such a long lasting imprint in your mind, and then so when you read their work, even like once 2 years later, you can still hear it for what it is. Like it's really nice. But yeah, it is weird.
Yeah. I often had that struggle of like, it sounds good, but will it look good on paper? But it's always like, well, actually, like that, it's not about them being the same piece, you know, on different mediums. It can be the same, or it can be completely different. And I think it's just as valuable. But I know a lot of sort of poets struggle with that same sense of like imposter syndrome of like, oh my gosh, like, should I put this into a book? Is my work worth anything? Does it mean anything to anyone? But it completely does. And it, just to go back to, you know, give poetry a chance completely also encompasses that. It provides it, I guess it reminds people there is worth in and meaning and care for what people want to say and express, and no matter how they choose to do that.
Yeah, like when I was putting the 2 books together, there was some that I was like, I'm not sure about that. But at the same time, I was thinking, it might sound weird, but every poem deserves a home. So like,
yeah, I love that.
I know,
I like that. Yeah.
There was someone I thought, oh, I've passed that now, it's a bit cringy, but then I thought, you know what, no, because it was once a part of me. So like, I think to anyone who's doubting that they should release some stuff, just go for it, because like, even if you look back and go, you know, I don't like that, at least it's there, so you can always come back to it, and then you can look back and see how much you progressed as well. So like, my writing style is so much different to when I first started out. Like, I think for most people, they think everything should rhyme, whereas now it's just write what I want to write and then structure it later. So yeah, I think that you should just go for it. So at the moment in time, like, I know I've sent you these instructions, but I'm looking to make a page on the Give Poetry a Chance website to help people create their own books. So I've noticed at the moment that there's a few people out there who call themselves publishers, but basically do it for other people, but then take a bit of a cut. So what I want to do is provide a page where people can learn how to publish themselves, get all the templates and documents, and then do it all by themselves. So even if they only do a limited run, then at least they have a physical copy. And even if they go, you know what, I don't like that, they can just keep a copy for themselves. And then if they don't want to show people, they don't have to, but the option's there to print more copies. So yeah, I think everyone should like have a physical copy. Feel really weird like reading stuff off a phone as well. It's I don't know. It feels quite rude. I know it's not.
I know
like,
what you mean.
I feel like I'm on my phone. I feel like someone should shout at me if I'm on my phone.
I also feel like sometimes when I read from my phone as well, I'm like, don't want the brightness too high because then it's going to be shining on my face. And it's just like, yeah, I find it weird. Yeah, definitely agree with that.
It was funny talking about phones and reading poetry. I went to Blackfest with Blue Boy a few years back. Absolutely loved it. And at the end, like, I was sat there, I was like, I'm just getting itchy feet. I thought I've got a few like poems that at the time we knew it was, I think, one of my favorite political ones. It was like, oh, like they've got me kind of like ready to go on, and they had like an open mic section at the end. So Blue Boy was like, oh, why don't you go up? I was like, oh, do you think so? He's like, yeah, go for it. So I had like a few poems saved on my in my inbox. Couldn't get signal, and I stood in front of everybody and I couldn't get signal, and I'd talked through the meaning behind this poem and couldn't find it. So then I had to like just pick any old poem and read it, because it was like, I'm in front of all these people. It was like a hall full of maybe 100 people, maybe a bit less, I might be exaggerating, but I was just like, the spotlight's on me and I've got nothing to read. And I was just kind of laughing and joking. Like, I think people realize when they come to my events, my kind of default is when I'm like nervous, I just take the mick out of myself. Like, I find just having a laugh is like the best way to distract people.
Yeah.
So like, if the microphone stand falls, like, people have saw me in the past kind of falling with the microphone stand just to lighten the mood a bit. But yeah. It was nerve-wracking standing in front of people thinking, oh no, the poem's in my I don't know even where it was. I think I found it, Sod's Law, after I left the venue. So but still good reception, which was nice, but I was really embarrassed.
As someone with anxiety, that made my heart palpitate for sure. Just hearing that, I was like, oh my god. I always keep my poetry like on my notes app, and like I always have it ready before I even get to the event, so I can just like unlock my phone and it will be there, because I'm so like worried of that happening, because I'm not funny. I'm not funny. I'd be like, so guys, I don't know what to do. I'd just be looking around for someone to like rescue me. I'm like, help me. So I'm glad that you like are able to have a comedic touch. I don't do it like naturally though. I'm always like, I don't know, if it just would come this mic's falling down. I'll hold it. I just kind of like see it as, I don't know, if I can ease people's nerves in the crowd. Like, I always get up at the beginning, and it's not because they're like, oh, I'm first, or oh, I organised this. It's more just, if someone's starting for the first time, they witness how like silly and odd I am, then like they'll relax, and like if they see me mess up a poem, they'll know that it's okay. It's reassurance. Right. Yeah, definitely. It relieves the pressure. I really enjoy being able to go to events where I'm not full of anxiety before I perform, because like I want to be excited. I want that like good nervous, not like the I'm gonna make a mistake and my world's gonna be over and like, oh my god. So yeah, it's great for that. I just had one final question. I feel like we kind of answered it anyway, but you usually do ask guests this, you know, if someone's listening or watching us this episode and thinking, oh yeah, I kind of do want to give poetry a chance, do you have any tips or advice or just any messages to give to someone? I do feel like every poem deserves a home was like, wow, amazing, spot on. But do you have anything that you'd share to anyone who's listening?
Yeah, I think go for it. Just start writing and never think it's not a poem. Like I've had a lot of people say, is this a poem? Can you look at this for me?
Right.
I always say, like, I'll happily read and I'll happily tell you how I feel about it. But I can't like critique a poem, because if you think it's a poem and it comes from your heart, then it is. Like I've got one which, looking back, it's really weird and cringy, but I basically mixed the instructions of how to create an omelette with how to create TNT. I mixed it together and called it Explosive Omelette. Thought it was funny, and just looking back, it's weird. But I think just give it a go. I think it's a really good way of like getting a lot off your mind. And once you start writing, you don't want to stop. And it goes for performing as well. I think the first performance is nerve-wracking, but you don't want to come off that stage. I did it. The first performance I did was 20 minutes long. And at first I was super nervous. I was shaking. I powered through most of it, but then I wanted to get back up. And it's just, I think if you never give it a chance, then you'll never know how it feels. So it's always give everything a chance once at least. And if you don't like it and it's not for you, then fair enough. But you can always say, at least I give it a go. So yeah.
That's right, guys. Take home is give poetry a chance. Full circle. We did it. Thank you, Dan, so much for coming in and for sharing your story. It's been really interesting to hear more a bit about like what got you into poetry and seeing the development and hearing about it with Give Poetry a Chance. It's been great. If anyone's listening, you should definitely check out Give Poetry a Chance and come down to one of the events, because it's really is like a really lovely space to be part of, whether you consider yourself a creative or a poet at all. Regardless, it's a really lovely environment to be part of. So thank you again.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Of course. So that's it for today's episode. If you have enjoyed and you're watching us on YouTube, please give it a thumbs up. If you're watching it on one of our other streaming platforms, give us a rating, let us know what you think. Maybe jump onto YouTube and leave us a comment and let us know if you enjoyed it, if you have any things that you want to share with us. I have been your host, Claire Beard-Raz. If you want to keep up to date with any events or projects that I'm up to, you can follow me on my socials. They're all at Claire Beard-Raz as well. Also, a massive shout out to LVP Online for making this podcast possible and for all of the support as well. So thanks again, Dan. Really do appreciate it. And that is it for today's episode. So I'll see you in the next one.